That morning, the cemetery was as quiet as it always was, a kind of silence that presses against your ears until you feel like you're the only living person in the world. The air smelled faintly of damp earth, mixed with that cold, almost metallic scent that always comes after a light drizzle. The leaves in the trees rustled gently in the early breeze, and every step I took on the gravel path seemed loud, like I was intruding on a place that wasn't meant for the living. I knew this path by heart. I had walked it so many times in the last 2 years that I could have found my way to my son's grave even with my eyes closed. Every twist, every uneven stone, every patch of grass, I knew it all in my hands. I carried fresh white lilies. They were his favorite. He'd loved them ever since he was a little boy, always telling me they looked like snow but smelled like sunshine. Even after all this time, I still bring them, somehow. It makes me feel like I'm still keeping my promise to take care of him, even if he isn't here anymore. But then, I saw him. A small figure sat cross-legged in front of my son's headstone. I slowed my pace, squinting in disbelief. He looked like a boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old. He wore an old-fashioned wear-upon sweater, the kind you'd see in old photographs, with neat little patches sewn into the elbows. His hair was light brown and carefully combed to the side, but his skin, it was pale, not the pale of a child who spends too much time indoors. No, this was the kind of pale that made the skin seem almost translucent, like it didn't belong to someone alive. He didn't notice me at first. He was leaning slightly forward, his lips moving as he whispered to someone or something that wasn't there. His small hands rested in his lap, and every so often, he'd nod, as though responding to a question only he could hear. I stopped a few feet away, my grip tightening round the lilies. My heart had begun to pound so hard I could feel it in my throat. No one ever came here except me. This grave was in a quiet corner of the cemetery, far from the main path. Even the caretaker rarely passed by. So who was this child? I cleared my throat gently. Hello? The boy's head turned slowly, almost like he was reluctant to look at me. When his eyes met mine, I felt something cold slide down my spine. His eyes were soft, like gray, beautiful, but unsettling. They seemed far too calm for a child. Then he smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile kids usually give strangers. It wasn't shy or nervous or playful. It was knowing. You're his mom, aren't you? He asked. My mouth went dry. My son. The boy nodded toward the headstone without looking away from me. He told me you'd come today. I felt the breath catch in my chest. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe this was a neighbor's child. Maybe he'd wandered here by accident. Maybe I was misunderstanding him. But I hadn't told anyone I was coming today. I never told anyone when I visited. I glanced around the cemetery, but there was no one else in sight. Just rows and rows of silent stones, the wind threading through the grass. Sweetheart, do you know my son? I asked carefully, my voice shaking just a little. Yes, he said without hesitation, as though it were the simplest thing in the world. We play together sometimes. For a second, I just stared at him. His words made no sense, and yet, the way he said them, so calm, so certain, made it sound completely normal to him. The lilies felt heavier in my hands. My pulse was racing now, and I didn't know if it was fear or something else entirely. I stepped closer, close enough to read the name carved into the stone beside him. It was my son's name, the same date of birth, the same day I had memorized well. The boy wasn't mistaken about where he was. Play together, I repeated, my voice almost a whisper. Yes, the boy said, tilting his head slightly, still smiling that same strange, knowing smile, but only when it's quiet, when no one else is here. The way he said it, I don't know why, but it made the hairs on my arms stand up. I wanted to ask 100 questions: who he was, where he came from, how he knew my son, but all I could do was stand there, caught between disbelief and the kind of chill you feel when you sense something isn't quite right. A cloud passed over the sun then, dimming the light. And for a moment the world felt colder, smaller. I looked at the boy again. He hadn't moved an inch, and for reasons I still can't explain, I felt like he had been waiting for me. I took a deep breath and stepped closer. My shoes crunching against the gravel, I tried to sound calm, but my voice betrayed me, trembling just slightly. "Do you know my son?" The boy didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said simply, as if it were the most natural answer in the world. "We play together sometimes." For a moment, I just stood there, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. Play together? My mind scrambled for a logical explanation. Maybe he was mistaken. Maybe he'd met another boy with the same name. Maybe he was just a lonely kid from one of the houses beyond the cemetery fence. But deep down, something about the way he said it made my skin prickle. I forced a small smile, trying not to sound alarmed. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "my son passed away 2 years ago." He didn't look surprised. He didn't even blink. "I know," the boy replied, his lips curling into a wider smile. "That's why I come here. He gets lonely." The words hit me like ice water down my back. I stared at him, my heart pounding. Kids sometimes say strange things, but this was different. There was no confusion in his tone, no awkwardness, just certainty. I swallowed hard. "What's your name?" The boy tilted his head, as though considering whether to tell me. "Tommy," he said finally. "I don't have a last name anymore." I blinked. "What do you mean, you don't have a last name anymore?" Tommy just shrugged lightly, his pale fingers fiddling with a small object in his lap, a tiny metal toy car, scratched and worn. The kind you might find in an old box in the attic. "I just don't," he said simply, as if that explained everything. His voice was calm, too calm, and something about it, something in the way his words seemed to hang in the air, made me feel like I'd stepped into a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I glanced around, searching for signs of life. Another person, a caretaker, maybe his parents, but the cemetery was empty. Beyond the low iron fence, the road stretched out in both directions. No cars, no people. I turned back to him. "Where are your parents? Do they know you're here?" At that, his smile faded. Slowly, his gaze shifted from me to the headstone, and his voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I don't have parents anymore," he said, "just like your son doesn't." A strange pressure settled in the air around us. The gentle breeze that had been drifting through the trees just moments ago stopped completely. The branches above us stilled, like they'd been frozen in place, even the sound of leaves rustling gone. And that's when I realized I couldn't hear the birds anymore. The stillness was so sudden, so complete, that it made the hairs on my arms stand up. It wasn't just quiet, it was wrong, like the world had been turned down. The volume of life itself muted. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that my mind was just amplifying the weirdness of the moment. But the more I looked at the boy, the more I noticed the small, unsettling details. The way his clothes didn't seem new, but also didn't look worn like a modern kid's clothes would, almost like they'd been perfectly preserved from another time. The way his hair was combed so neatly, not a strand out of place, even though there was wind earlier, and his skin still that same pale, paper-like quality, with no flush of warmth from being outside. "Tommy," I said slowly, "where do you live?" His gray eyes flicked back to mine, unreadable. "I live here now." Something in my chest tightened. "Here, in the cemetery?" "Yes." It wasn't a hesitant answer. He said it as though it was obvious. I opened my mouth to ask him more, how long he'd been here, who took care of him, but he spoke first. "Your son likes it when you bring the flowers," he said. "He says they smell like home." The words rooted me to the spot. My son had said that before, not to anyone else, not even in front of family. It was something he used to tell me when I tucked him into bed and he saw the lilies on his nightstand. I felt my knees go weak. How do you know that?" I whispered. Tommy didn't answer. He just smiled again, a slow, almost sad smile. Somewhere far off, The faintest sound of wind stirred again, but here, near the headstone, it was still early calm. I couldn't shake the feeling that the rest of the world was carrying on. But, round us, time had gone strange. I realized then that I didn't feel like I was talking to a lost child anymore. I felt like I was talking to someone who wasn't supposed to be here at all. I lowered myself to the ground, my knees pressing into the cold grass. I tried to keep my tone even, to hide the unease in my voice. "Tommy," I began carefully, "where do you live?" He didn't hesitate, just lifted his small hand and pointed toward the far end of the cemetery. "Over there," he said softly, "past the big angel statue." I followed the direction of his finger. From where we were, I could just make out the silhouette of a large stone angel, wings spread wide, its head tilted downward as if in mourning. Beyond it stretched row after row of gravestones, fading into the shadows beneath the trees. But there were no houses, no benches, no place a child could possibly live. I turned back to ask him another question and my heart stopped. Tommy was gone. Not running away, gone. There was no sound of footsteps, no glimpse of movement between the headstones. Not hiding, gone either. There was nowhere nearby to disappear so quickly. He was simply gone. My breath caught in my throat. I scanned the area around me in disbelief, my head whipping from side to side. "Tommy," I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the dead silence. Nothing. The air felt heavier again, the kind of heavy that makes your ears buzz faintly. I looked at the spot where he'd been sitting just seconds ago. The grass was completely undisturbed, not flattened, not bent. No sign that anyone had been there at all, except for the flowers. The lilies I'd been holding earlier had slipped from my hands when I realized he'd vanished. They now lay on the grass, their white petals stark against the deep green. I reached for them slowly, my fingers trembling. Maybe I was tired, maybe the grief, the years of carrying it like a stone in my chest, was finally making me see things that weren't there. People talk about hallucinations when you lose someone, right? Maybe this was just my mind's cruel trick. But as I bent forward to place the lilies on my son's grave, something caught my eye. It was small, almost hidden in the shadow of the headstone. I reached for a hand when my fingers closed around the object. I felt the cool, worn metal against my skin. A toy car, a simple little car, its paint chipped, the wheels slightly stiff with age, but I knew it instantly. It was the same kind my son used to play with. I stared at it for a long moment, my chest tightening. My son had been obsessed with these tiny die-cast cars when he was alive. He'd line them up along the windowsill, race them across the kitchen table, sometimes even sleep with one clutched in his hand after he died. I kept a few of his favorites in a small wooden box in my bedroom, but this one, I hadn't brought it here. The realization made the air feel colder. I looked around again, my eyes darting across the gravestones, searching for any sign of movement. But the cemetery was still empty. Not even the faint hum of the caretakers more in the distance, just silence. I stood there for what felt like minutes, the toy car heavy in my palm, my mind racing through possibilities I didn't want to consider. Was this some cruel prank? Someone who knew about my son, who had left the toy here to mess with me, but who would do something like that, and why? Or was it possible that Tommy, if he had ever really been standing in front of me, had left it? I shook my head, trying to banish the thought. Kids don't just vanish into thin air. I was stressed, overwhelmed. Maybe I'd imagined more than I realized, and yet, no matter how much I told myself that, the weight of that little car in my hand told a different story. I crouched down, placing the lilies gently in front of the headstone. Then, after a moment's hesitation, I set the toy car beside them. It looked almost right there, like it belonged. But the sight of it also made something inside me twist. A strange mix of comfort and dread. Comfort, because it was a reminder of my son, of something he loved. Dread, because I had no idea how it had gotten there or what it meant. A faint gust of wind stirred the grass then, breaking the stillness. Somewhere far away, I thought I heard the faint cry of a crow. I took a step back from the grave, my eyes lingering on the toy car one last time before I turned and began to walk toward the gate. The feeling that I was being watched followed me all the way to my car, and even as I drove away, my hands tight on the steering wheel, I couldn't stop thinking about the boy with the pale face and the way he had smiled when he said, "We play together sometimes." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, the pale skin, the gray eyes, that strange, almost knowing smile, and always his voice in my head, soft and certain. "We play together sometimes." It wasn't just what he said, it was the way he said it. Like it was the simplest truth in the world. Like it wasn't odd at all for a boy to play with someone who'd been dead for 2 years. By morning, I knew I couldn't just leave it alone. I needed answers, any answers. I decided to go to the small records office attached to the cemetery. It was an old brick building with a faded green door, the kind that creaked when you opened it. Inside, it smelled faintly of dust and old paper. The caretaker was there, a man in his late 60s with weathered hands and a deep, gravelly voice. I'd seen him before, trimming the hedges or clearing fallen branches, but we'd never spoken. More than a polite "hello, morning," he said, looking up from the ledger he was writing in. "What can I do for you?" I hesitated, suddenly feeling foolish. How could I even begin to explain? "Hi, I saw a boy in the cemetery who vanished into thin air, and I think he knows my dead son." Still, I forced the words out. "Do you happen to know if there's a child buried here named Tommy?" He frowned, scratching at his temple. "Tommy?" He walked over to an old wooden cabinet and began pulling open drawers filled with yellowed index cards. His fingers moved slowly, methodically, scanning each one. Finally, he shook his head. "No Tommy in the last 10 years. Closest I've got is a Thomas. But that's from way back." My heart skipped. "How far back?" He slid the drawer closed and looked at me curiously. "Why do you ask?" I hesitated again, then told him not everything, just that I'd seen a little boy near my son's grave, that he'd said his name was Tommy, that he'd disappeared. The caretaker's expression changed, the lines on his face deepening. "Thomas Bennett," he said quietly, "died in 1954. Car accident. He's buried here, right past the big angel statue." A cold ripple went through me. That was exactly where Tommy had pointed when I asked him where he lived. The caretaker turned away, muttering, "Strange you'd ask about him. Haven't heard that name in years." I didn't wait for him to say more. I thanked him quickly and stepped outside, the crisp morning air biting at my cheeks. The cemetery was quiet again, but now it felt different, like every shadow was watching me. I followed the winding path toward the far end, where the big angel statue loomed in the distance. As I walked, I noticed how much older this section of the cemetery looked. The grass was patchier, the stones weathered and leaning slightly, names and dates worn down by decades of rain and wind. The angel itself was huge, easily 7 feet tall, carved from pale marble that had darkened in places with moss. Her wings stretched upward in an elegant arch, but her head was bowed low, her face solemn. One hand clutched a bouquet of stone roses. The other reached downward as if offering comfort to someone unseen. And just beyond her shadow, I saw it. The grave was small, no taller than my knee, the stone smoothed with age. I crouched down to read the inscription. "Thomas Bennett 1947-195 for our beloved Sony." Traced the letters with my fingertips. The stone cold beneath my skin, a boy who had died at just 7 years old. The same age Tommy appeared to be. But that wasn't all. Sitting neatly on top of the headstone was a small toy car. It looked almost identical to the one I had found by my son's grave the day before. Same make, same chip paint, the same tiny scratch along the roof. I reached for it slowly, half expecting it to vanish the moment I touched it. But it didn't. It was solid, real, cold to the touch. My mind raced. Had someone put it here recently? Was this all some strange coincidence? Or had Tommy, the boy who should have been nothing more than a name on a headstone, left it himself? I stood there for a long time, staring at that grave. The wind picked up slightly, whispering through the grass, and I felt something like the faintest brush against my shoulder. When I turned, there was no one there. But in that moment, I swear I heard the faint sound of a child laughing. It was distant, almost carry on the wind, but it was there, and it sent a shiver straight down my spine. I placed the toy car back on the headstone, my fingers lingering on it for a moment before I pulled away. Then I turned and began walking back toward the main path, each step feeling heavier than the last, because now I wasn't just thinking about my son anymore. I was thinking about Thomas Bennett, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Tommy hadn't just been talking about my son when he said we play together sometimes. For weeks after finding Thomas Bennett's grave, I couldn't stop thinking about Tommy. I started going to the cemetery more often than before. At first, it was just to be with my son. But deep down, I knew I was also hoping to see that strange little boy again. Every visit felt like a gamble. Some days, it was quiet, just the wind rustling the trees, the faint hum of traffic far away. Other days, I would find small signs that made my heart race. A toy car placed neatly at my son's headstone, a tiny marble resting against the flowers. Once even a folded paper airplane with no writing on it. Each time, I wondered, had Tommy left it, or was my mind just finding patterns where there were none? Then, one cloudy afternoon, I felt it, the same unnatural stillness as the first time. It wasn't just quiet. It was too quiet. No birds, no wind, no shifting leaves. The kind of silence that feels like the world is holding its breath. I turned, and there he was, sitting cross-legged beside my son's grave, rolling a toy car back and forth in the dirt. His pale little hands moved slowly, like he wasn't in a hurry at all. "Hi," I said softly, my voice breaking just a little. He looked up and smiled, as if he'd been expecting me all along. "I told you," he said. "We play together." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to step closer. "Tommy, do you know where you're supposed to be?" He nodded, still smiling. "I am where I'm supposed to be, but I don't like being alone. Your son doesn't either." His words hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent 2 years visiting my boy's grave, talking to him, crying for him, but it never occurred to me that someone else might be keeping him company. Someone I couldn't understand, someone I couldn't explain. Tommy placed the toy car gently on the grass, right by the base of the headstone. Then he stood, brushing off his knees, his small frame looking even thinner under the gray sky. "I have to go now," he said. My chest tightened. "Go where?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked toward the far end of the cemetery, past the rows of gravestones, to where the big angel statue stood. "But tell your son," he said, "I'll see him again tomorrow." Something about the way he said it made my heart ache and my skin crawl all at once. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't sad. It was, matter of fact, like a promise. Before I could say anything else, he turned and walked toward the angel statue. I stepped forward to follow him, my breath quickening. But then, he vanished, not like someone ducking behind a tree or slipping out of sight. One second he was there, the next, he was gone. The stillness broke. A breeze swept through, rustling the grass. I could hear the birds again, and I was left standing alone between the graves, my heart pounding. I never saw him again after that day. But here's the thing, every week since, when I bring lilies to my son's grave, there's always a small toy car waiting for me. Sometimes it's red, sometimes blue, once even a bright yellow one with chipped paint. I never see anyone leave them. The caretaker swears he doesn't touch the graves. There are no kids who play in that cemetery, and yet they're there. It's strange. When I see that little car sitting there, I don't feel afraid anymore. I feel comforted, because maybe, just maybe, my son isn't alone out there after all. And somewhere, past the big angel statue, there's a boy named Tommy waiting to keep his promise.